July 4th, 1187. The scorching heat of the Palestinian highlands bears down mercilessly as 20,000 Crusader knights and infantry stumble across barren rock, their tongues swollen with thirst, their armour cooking them alive in the desert sun. Behind them, the drums of Saladin's army thunder like approaching doom. Ahead lies nothing but empty wasteland and certain death. This is the story of how one man's greed destroyed an entire kingdom. How a single act of breathtaking stupidity shattered 2 centuries of Christian conquest in the Holy Land. How the greatest military disaster in crusading history unfolded not through superior enemy tactics, but through catastrophic leadership that defied every principle of medieval warfare. This is the Battle of Hattin. And it began not with swords and siege engines, but with one man who believed the rules didn't apply to him. Meet Reynald of Chatillon, a French nobleman whose lust for plunder would cost Christendom everything they'd spent generations building in the East. Picture a man so reckless, so driven by greed that he would violate sacred truces, attack pilgrimage caravans, and thumb his nose at both his own king and the most powerful Muslim leader of his age. Reynald wasn't just dangerous because he was violent, he was dangerous because he was stupid. The year is 1186, and an uneasy peace exists between the Crusader states and Saladin's growing empire. Trade flows along ancient routes, pilgrims journey safely to holy sites. Both sides understand that this truce serves everyone's interests. Everyone except Reynald. From his fortress at Kerak, this French warlord eyes the rich caravans passing beneath his walls with undisguised hunger. These aren't military convoys. They're merchants, families, traders carrying goods between Egypt and Syria. Under the terms of the truce, they travel under protection. Their safety is guaranteed by treaty. Reynald doesn't care. In late 1186, his forces sweep down from Kerak like bandits, falling upon a massive caravan travelling the Damascus road. Men are butchered. Women and children are dragged away in chains. Goods worth a fortune disappear into Reynald's treasury. When survivors reach Saladin's court with news of the massacre, the Sultan's rage is terrible to behold. But Saladin is a politician as much as a warrior. He sends envoys to King Guy de Lusignan demanding justice, compensation for the stolen goods, release of the prisoners, punishment for the treaty breaker. Guy, weak and ineffectual as always, agrees immediately. He orders Reynald to make amends. Reynald's response is pure arrogance. He declares that he is lord of his own lands, answerable to no one. He owes the Muslims nothing. The truce, he claims, doesn't bind him personally. He keeps the prisoners, he keeps the treasure, and he dares anyone to take it from him. This is the moment. This is where everything begins to unravel. Because Reynald has just handed Saladin the perfect excuse for war. The Sultan no longer needs to be the aggressor. He's been forced into action by Crusader treachery. Every Muslim ruler in the region now sees this as a holy war of righteous vengeance. Saladin's response is swift and devastating. By spring of 1187, the largest Muslim army assembled in decades is marching toward the Jordan River. This isn't a raiding party, this is conquest. Saladin has called in every favour, united every faction, mobilised every resource. Kurdish mountain fighters ride alongside Egyptian regulars, Turkish horse archers mass with Syrian infantry. The black banners of jihad snap in the desert wind. The Crusader response reveals just how catastrophically they've miscalculated. King Guy assembles his own army, but the numbers tell the story. 20,000 men. That sounds impressive until you realise this represents virtually every fighting man in the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Castle garrisons have been stripped bare. Fortified towns stand nearly defenceless. They've bet everything on a single throw of the dice. The army that gathers at Sephari represents the flower of Crusader nobility. The military orders are there in force. Templars and Hospitallers, warrior monks whose reputation strikes fear across the Muslim world. Great barons bring their household knights. Sergeants and crossbowmen fill out the ranks. On paper, it's a formidable force. But leadership matters more than numbers, and here the Crusaders face a problem that will prove fatal. King Guy de Lusignan is everything a medieval king shouldn't be. Weak where he should be strong, indecisive where he should be bold, politically isolated and militarily inexperienced. He's surrounded by advisors who hate each other more than they fear their enemies. The most dangerous of these is Raymond of Tripoli, a man whose bitter rivalry with Guy has poisoned Crusader politics for years. Raymond represents the old guard, nobles who've lived in the East for generations and understand the delicate balance of power. He advocates for defensive warfare, using their fortified positions to weather Saladin's assault. Guy, desperate to prove his worthiness as king, leans toward aggression. He's been mocked as a coward, dismissed as unworthy of the crown. This is his chance to silence the critics with a glorious victory. The debate rages through the hot June nights at Sephiri. Raymond argues for patience, lets Saladin come to them, force him to assault their prepared positions, make him pay in blood for every mile. But Guy's younger advisors whisper poison in his ear. They speak of glory, of decisive action, of the need to protect Tiberias where Raymond's own wife is supposedly trapped. It's a trap within a trap. Saladin has deliberately besieged Tiberias precisely because he knows it will force the Crusaders into exactly this debate. He's counting on their pride, their honor, their inability to let a Christian city fall without a fight. He understands them better than they understand themselves. The final decision comes on July 2nd. Against all military wisdom, against the advice of his most experienced commanders, Guy orders the army to march. They will abandon their secure base at Sephiri. They will cross 16 miles of waterless highland in the brutal summer heat. They will attempt to relieve Tiberias while under constant attack from Saladin's mobile forces. It's military suicide disguised as noble gesture. And as the Crusader army forms up in the pre-dawn darkness of July 3rd, their fate is already sealed. They just don't know it yet. The march begins at dawn on July 3rd, and from the very first steps, everything goes wrong. The Crusader column stretches for miles across the rocky terrain, a slow-moving target that Saladin's forces attack like wolves, hunting wounded prey. Turkish horse archers appear on the ridgelines, loose volleys of arrows into the packed ranks, then vanish before the heavy cavalry can respond. The heat is merciless. By mid-morning, knights are collapsing inside their mail hauberks. Horses foam at the mouth and stumble. The infantry carrying heavy packs and weapons begin to lag behind. Water becomes more precious than gold, and there isn't enough of either. Saladin has positioned his forces with surgical precision. Every spring along the route is either poisoned or heavily guarded. Every patch of shade conceals Muslim archers. The Crusaders aren't marching to battle. They're walking into an execution chamber. By midday, the situation becomes desperate. Raymond of Tripoli, riding with the vanguard, realizes they'll never reach Tiberias before nightfall. The army is disintegrating under the constant harassment. Men are dropping by the dozens. The formation is stretching thin as stragglers fall behind. He makes the fateful decision to alter course toward the springs of Hattin, just 6 miles away. It seems logical. Get water, regroup, then continue to Tiberias in the morning. But this decision plays directly into Saladin's hands. The Sultan has been herding them toward this exact spot for hours. As the Crusader army trudges toward those life-saving springs, Muslim forces race ahead to cut them off. By the time Guy's exhausted soldiers crest the ridge overlooking Hattin, they see the truth. Saladin's banners fly over the springs. Thousands of enemy warriors control every drop of water for miles. They're trapped on a waterless plateau with nowhere to run. The night of July 3rd becomes a vision of hell. 20,000 men camp on barren rock without water, while Muslim forces surround them completely. Saladin's psychological warfare begins immediately. War drums thunder through the darkness. Horns blow haunting calls. Thousands of voices chant prayers and battle songs that echo off the hills like the voices of demons. Then comes the smoke. Muslim soldiers set fire to the dry grass around the plateau. Thick, choking clouds roll across the Crusader camp, making breathing agony and driving men to the edge of madness. The few remaining water skins are emptied in desperate gulps. Horses collapse and die. The infantry, already demoralized, begins to desert in groups. King Guy sits in his tent, paralyzed by the magnitude of his miscalculation. His army is dying around him, and dawn will bring the final assault. There's no escape, no reinforcements, no miracle coming to save them. July 4th, 1187, dawns clear and merciless. The Muslim army has spent the night bringing up fresh water from the Sea of Galilee. Camels carry full water skins right up to the front lines. Saladin's soldiers drink deeply, wash their faces, fill their bellies, while 20,000 Crusaders watch in desperate envy from the hills above. The psychological impact is devastating. These aren't just enemies anymore. They're men who control the thing the Crusaders need most to survive. Every sip the Muslims take is torture for the watching Christians. Saladin begins the final phase methodically. His archers move into position on the slopes, creating killing fields that cover every approach. Infantry blocks the narrow passes that lead off the plateau. The heavy cavalry waits in reserve, ready to exploit any breakthrough. The first Crusader attack comes at dawn. Raymond of Tripoli, commanding the vanguard, launches a desperate charge toward the springs below. His knights thunders down the slope in perfect formation, lances levelled, war cries echoing across the battlefield. They never reach the water. Saladin's troops part before them like a curtain, then close behind, cutting off their retreat. Raymond and a handful of survivors break through the Muslim lines and flee toward Tyre, abandoning the army to its fate. Whether this is cowardice or tactical wisdom, the result is the same. The Crusader vanguard has vanished. Now comes the systematic destruction. Guy orders charge after charge, each one weaker than the last. Knights who should be unstoppable on horseback can barely stay in their saddles. Their mounts are dying beneath them. Their weapons feel like lead weights. Men who fought for decades across the Holy Land find themselves helpless against an enemy who controls the single thing they cannot live without. The infantry breaks first. Thousands of foot soldiers flee uphill toward the twin peaks called the Horns of Hattin, throwing down their weapons and begging for mercy. They're cut down like wheat or taken prisoner in massive groups. The professional core of the Crusader army simply evaporates. By mid-morning, only the heavy cavalry remains. A few hundred knights clustered around King Guy's banner on the plateau, surrounded by tens of thousands of enemies. They're no longer fighting to win, they're fighting to die with honor, to die. Saladin's final assault comes from all directions simultaneously. Arrows darken the sky, infantry swarms up the slopes. The remaining Crusader knights are overwhelmed by sheer numbers, dragged from their horses, beaten down with clubs and swords. King Guy himself is captured when his horse collapses beneath him. The true cross, the most sacred relic in Christendom, disappears into Muslim hands. The greatest military disaster in crusading history is complete, but the real catastrophe isn't the battle itself. It's what happens next. With virtually every fighting man in the kingdom dead or captured, there's no one left to defend the Crusader cities. Saladin's forces sweep across Palestine like a flood. Acre falls. Jaffa surrenders. Beirut opens its gates without a fight. On October 2nd, 1187, less than 3 months after Hattin, Jerusalem itself capitulates. The city that took the first crusade 3 years to capture falls to Saladin in a single day. 2 centuries of Christian rule in the Holy Land collapse like a house of cards. The news reaches Europe like a thunderbolt. Pope Urban III literally dies of shock when he hears of the defeat. His successor immediately calls for a new crusade. Kings across Europe begin mobilizing armies, but the damage is done. The Crusader states will never recover their former strength. The Battle of Hattin stands as the perfect storm of medieval warfare. One man's greed, one king's weakness, one decision that doomed an empire. Reynaud of Chatillon's reckless attack on that caravan didn't just break a truce. It shattered the delicate balance that had kept the Crusader states alive for generations. Think about the mathematics of disaster. 20,000 of the finest warriors in Christendom, destroyed in a single day because their leaders couldn't resist the urge to play hero. 52 cities lost because Guy de Lusignan refused to listen to the one man who understood their enemies. an entire kingdom erased because pride mattered more than survival. Saladin didn't win at Hattin through superior numbers or revolutionary tactics. He won because he understood his opponents better than they understood themselves. He knew their weaknesses, their honor, their inability to ignore a challenge. He turned their greatest strengths against them and watched them destroy themselves. The Third Crusade would come. Richard the Lionheart would win his victories, but the Crusader states never truly recovered from that scorching July day when arrogance met reality on a waterless plateau in Palestine. Sometimes in history, everything changes in a single moment. This was one of those moments.